Many thanks for attending this short interview. Could you just begin by telling us who you are and what your role is and your institution?
My name is Simon Marginson. I'm a Professor of Higher Education at the University of Melbourne in Melbourne, Australia, and I've been in that position for about 5 years. My fields of research and teaching and doctoral supervision are international and global aspects of higher education policy. I've also done work on the economics of education.
You talked in your presentation about the 2010 decision and the implications of that, which I think stem from the UK policies and recent activities here. For those people who weren't here to hear you elaborate on that theme, what was the 2010 decision and why? What are the implications and why are they so far-reaching?
Well, in December, the coalition government announced that it would create a new kind of higher education system with radically higher levels of student tuition fee, but protected by an income contingent repayment arrangement which softens the pressure that a high fee places on families by allowing students to pay back in their own time and their own rate. But nevertheless, a high fee system. It also created a much fiercer competition between institutions for high quality students and a cut price competition for students in the bottom half of the higher education system, students coming in and on different terms to the high achieving students going to the leading institutions, coming in at a much lower level of funding with fairly impoverished material position and fairly impoverished curriculum, I suspect, as well. So a much more unequal system and one in which competition is the main driver.
There's aspects here, again, with public policies and private money that goes into universities as well. And again, you talked about the tensions between these things. For you, what are the key tensions between the public and private aspects of the university funding and policies and so on?
Well, I think the key issue that the December 2010 reforms raise is whether we see higher education as predominantly a private benefit for the individuals who do it, or whether it's got substantial social benefits which flow on throughout the economy and society beyond those who are actually acquiring the education at the time. I mean, the sort of social benefits which higher education creates, things like a more educated democracy, better health outcomes. Higher education also enriches the productivity of not just the people who graduate, but those who work with them. So there are a lot of flow-on effects in the workplace from educated graduates, which aren't captured in the salaries received by those graduates, but are larger sort of public benefits. Now, the question is whether we keep trying to build those public benefits, those collective common benefits, as an aspect of our higher education, or whether we simply see it as a kind of supermarket-style good where individuals go in and purchase a degree which is designed to enrich them as much as possible. That second view of higher education is one which has been foregrounded by the reforms. That's how you run a higher education market, but it's not necessarily the best outcome from the point of view of the society as a whole.
So in terms of the quality of a degree in this system, these changes, do you think they'll improve the quality, or do you just see it as being the same, but it's just a changed society as a result?
No, I think what's going to happen is you're going to see a substantial enrichment of the very top institutions which are able to charge tuition at the highest level, and where they'll be drawing on an increasing range of other forms of private funding from philanthropy and business and so on as they get stronger. And the institutions at the middle and lower levels of the higher education system, where they'll be taking in students at lower levels of funding and therefore have less resources with which to educate them well. They'll be stretching their teaching resources more thinly and therefore putting at risk their research performance, their research activities and so on. So you'll see this sort of two-tier system, more I suppose we've always had to some extent a tiered system, but a much more abrupt and more vertically stretched sort of two-tier system between advantaged, wealthy, successful institutions educating mainly a social elite and more impoverished institutions educating a broader range of people.
Do you think this will put some institutions out of business? For those middle and lower universities who are taking students on a different fee-paying basis, do you think they'll ultimately, some will just fade away or they'll just go out of business?
There's a natural limit to the ability of the leading institutions to keep expanding. I mean, if they keep expanding, they stretch their own resources too thin to do a proper job in terms of quality that they now aspire to on a global level. So I think you'll see that there'll be continued limitations in the number of places that they're offering, which sustains enrolments at the middle and lower status levels of the higher education system. I think some institutions will be under pressure in a competitive student-driven market, but I doubt if government is going to want to see institutions go to the wall, and I'd be very surprised if we see actual closures. But there'll be some which will remain in a fairly depressed position, which may not be very good for anyone.
So when we think about the state role in higher education, for you, what do you consider the best role for the state to be in the future of higher education, not just here in the UK, but maybe elsewhere?
I think that's a really good question, and it hasn't been asked enough, and it's one that's worth discussing and debating on a broad basis. I think the role of government is to provide a core level of funding, which represents the broader public benefits that a higher education system creates, and I'd estimate that they're probably about half the total benefit that higher education creates, with the other half being the individual benefits for the students. So a core state commitment of 50% of the cost would make sense in terms of the economics of higher education. At the moment, it looks like there'll be no state subsidy at all in social sciences and humanities programs, which is a serious weakness in English higher education now. It means that those subjects will be impoverished and the enrolments will fall below the level which otherwise would occur on the basis of student demand. So I think a 50-50 split of funding would be a fair, appropriate one, and I think then the state should step back to a degree from high-performing, good quality institutions, allow them to run their own affairs, not regulate them too closely and in too detailed a way, but make sure they're transparent so the public knows what's going on and they're not simply propping up their own interests at the expense of the students. It's very important that we keep improving the performance of our institutions, and we can only do that through transparency. But I think forceful government direction from above is not the way to go in terms of improving performance and access. We need our institutions to operating autonomously to do the right thing. We need to build their capacity to perform well.
I'm sure the fees and the futures is going to be one of the topics of conversation throughout the conference here, and I expect people will be talking about this right now in the breaks and so on. But if there's one idea from the many themes and issues you raised in your presentation that you would like people to take away from that session and to think about and discuss, what would that one key idea be?
I think the old idea of equality of opportunity needs to be brought back onto the table. The idea that a just, fair, socially responsible education system provides every child from every family with the opportunity to study hard, do well at school, and go on to fulfilling and worthwhile work in the future. That core idea of upward mobility through education, the democratic right that education provides for everyone to play a larger role in society if they make the effort and equip themselves to do so. I think it's very important we bring that back and we start to measure our performance in terms of how many students from poorer families and poorer regions and poorer cities are coming through and doing well in education. That's one of the measures of how good our education system is. We don't want an education system which is merely a way of recycling social elites from generation to generation in a small number of elite institutions. We want an education system where every institution is of good quality and provides real opportunities for students to learn well and to do well in later life.